Southern Sports Gumbo here. We're going to dive into a little college football playoff and bowl recap. Things we thought were interesting the last week or so of college football. And we'll dive into which conference is the best, and then finish up with some portal news. So, Sweets, want to get us started with some bowl recap or thoughts?
Sure. So one of the biggest things, obviously, the playoffs. The Miami Texas A&M game. I'll cover that because I called Miami winning that game because, as Texas A&M showed, they were going to do what Texas A&M does best, and that's choke in the big moment. The fact that they only scored, what was it, 3 points in front of their home crowd in a playoff game. Embarrassing. The fact that they weren't able to get anything going. And Miami has a really good defense when they're hitting on all cylinders. Easy for me to say they're as good as anybody in the country. But that game against Texas A&M, they just blew doors. And Texas A&M really, credit to Miami's defense, but Marcel Reed just had a bad game. His worst game of the season, just a really bad time to have it. Um, as far as Miami's next game, who are they facing next here?
Ohio State.
Ohio State, yeah. That's where it ends. They've got the defense, I think, that can keep Ohio State to 17, 21 points. I just don't think their offense can get anything going against Ohio State's defense because Ohio State's defense is another one of those that if they've got it going, you're really in trouble. So I'm going to like Ohio State in that game. What game are you thinking about, DMAC?
Yeah, so the game I watched the most would have been the LSU Houston game. And to me, that's a game that LSU needs to win 10 times out of 10. A little bit of a depleted defense. I get the offense was a little better. I mean, put up 28 points on offense, big kick return too. Yeah, I mean, I love college football bowl season, but it's becoming more and more apparent that some of these teams just don't care if they're not playing in the college football playoff. Um, the preparation isn't there, the focus isn't there. I think that really bit LSU quite a bit going into the Texas Bowl. So yeah, that would probably be my biggest takeaway is there's got to be a way to re-incentivize or rejuvenate interest into these bowl games because I mean they're so fun. I know the money, but I was at the New Orleans Bowl, Western Kentucky, Southern Miss. Not comparing those programs to a program like LSU. Man, you've got mom, dad, aunt, cousin, sister, brother, um, you know, third removed cousin from a divorce. Everybody's there to watch you play. Um, so figuring out a way to, you know, I don't want to say force participation, but I don't know, do some fun activities, even if it's not as big of a game. Find something for the players to do, in the community that week. And I know they all go to children's hospitals and stuff. Man, just find a way to make it a little more fun for the players, I guess. Because as a fan, I mean, I love watching every bowl game. Usually every year, everything from Birmingham Bowl to New Orleans Bowl to the Pop Tarts Bowl. They're all fun in my opinion, but the last couple seasons we've lost a little bit of that magic in bowl season. So Kevin, what are your thoughts on bowl season?
So I would take the side of this, and so one, I agree with you. I don't think the interest level is there amongst the fans as it has been. But I will say this: if you've watched bowls, the games this year, there's been a lot of competitive games. To your point, I think the way to incentivize it, the winning team pay the winning players. I think that would be a way to do it. Again, it's all about the NIL and the money now anyway. But I think the one thing that I want to hit on is how competitive a lot of the games have been. You mentioned LSU and Houston. LSU should win that game, but very competitive game. If you're just a fan, it's an entertaining game to watch. You had Minnesota, win a 3-point game over New Mexico. Jackson State beat Troy, and that's two teams in Alabama that have a good following there, and that was a 4-point game. Arkansas State, Missouri State was a 1-touchdown game. There's just been a lot of competitive games outside the playoff games, and obviously Miami and A&M and Oklahoma and Alabama was a competitive game. Louisville Toledo was a 5-point game. Ohio UNLV was a 1-score game. Hawaii California. Hawaii came back in that game. California jumped out, was up 11, and Hawaii scored late to win the game. Very much like BYU scored 15 points unanswered to beat Georgia Tech when it looked like Georgia Tech had control of that game. And then North Texas, San Diego State, 2-point game, 49-47. Very entertaining game there. East Carolina beating Pitt by 6. Even though Clemson and Penn State was a 12-point game, it was a very interesting game to watch. So I think that, to me, for the fans, for the guy that's just wants to watch the games, I think we've had more competitive games this year than we have, and hopefully that will stir some more interest from a fan standpoint. The games and how competitive they've been, and more balanced. I think we're seeing more parity. We'll talk about that when we get into the conference piece, but I just think there's more parity overall. The transfer portals brought that in. So that would be the one thing that stood out to me, is how competitive parity level that's been there for games.
And D-Mac, you remember a few weeks ago the Notre Dame conversation, those guys pulling out of the bowl. You said something in describing the coolness of bowl season, and that everybody comes out, every aunt, brother, sister, cousin, whatever, every friend they've ever had comes out for that last game, and those guys who are done, this is it for them. They get that one last shot in a bowl game to get everybody out there and to celebrate their football career. Because let's face it, most, over 90% of these guys that are playing in these bowl games, that they're done. This is, they won't be playing anymore after that bowl game. So, for teams to back out of that and rob their student athletes of that opportunity, I think is, I just think there's a better way to do it. But Kevin, you talked about it, the money. I don't know, I know that they divide up X amount of dollars between these teams. It's always going to be about the money. But I think the only way that you could get more participation is by incentivizing these players with cash. I mean, the money talks, and a lot of them are opting out because they don't want to get injured and mess up their, their not just draft prospects. You remember 8-9 years ago, Leonard Fournette got this started by opting out of the bowl game against Louisville back in the day. Now, they're not opting out because they're NFL prospects. They're opting out because they don't want to hurt themselves before going into the portal. So it's just become, it's getting crazier and crazier, and it's, money is the only thing that you can incentivize them. The bowls are cool. They have, we've all been to them, and they have so many fun activities for the fans, the players. They do the wing eating contest and the karaoke and all that jazz, and it's a great time. But at the end of the day, the way you're going to keep the better players in the games is by paying them to stick around.
Yeah, I mean, why can't Kinder's, who sponsors the Texas Bowl, throw out a couple $50,000 bonuses to players? In the grand scheme of things, if each sponsor spent another 150, 200 grand, I know, over a year, 50 grand may not be as much to these players. Man, for 3 hours to get a $50,000 bonus, that's pretty stout, in my opinion.
Yeah, you're right, and it'd be great for a lot of the lower tier guys on the roster too, who aren't getting the big NIL deals and who aren't making the, supporting their families.
It's So over to which conference is the best conference in college football? I feel like, geez, for probably the last 15 years, it's been the SEC in a landslide. But after watching some of these games, LSU losing to Houston, Missouri losing to Virginia, um, is the SEC still as dominant as they once were? What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, I think the simple answer here is no, and I'm in agreement with you. I would argue for many, many years that the SEC was heads and tails above uh, the Big Ten. But I think the last two national championships come from the Big Ten. I think those two conferences are on a more level playing field now. The bottom of the Big Ten is not. But that being said, I mean, the bottom of the SEC, Arkansas could lose to a lot of teams. Kentucky, and that type of stuff. So I definitely think that the SEC and the Big Ten are more on a level playing field now. You take the top three teams from the Big Ten. You take Oregon, Ohio State, Indiana. You put them against the top three from the SEC. You let them play each other 6 times. You probably have an equal outcome. And I also think that SEC regression, and again, the portal and what we're talking about, I still think the ACC and the Big 12 are quite a bit below those two conferences. But I will say the difference is not as great as it was even last year. I will say that. I think, again, Virginia beating a Missouri, and I know they were the best record in the ACC this year, but still, it's Virginia. And you look at Chandler Morris and the impact he had, and it's a 13-7 game that neither team really played that well. So again, Missouri was 8-4 in the SEC in total record. That type of SEC team would have won that game 5 years ago. So I just think I referenced it. I just think there's more parity in this now. The transfer portal and NIL has just equaled it up to parity. There's not the depth. That was the thing that made the SEC so strong for that 15-year period you're talking about, was just the depth factor, the overall recruiting in those schools. And the portal and NIL has just changed that. And to me, it's just created more parity across football. I think the SEC, the Big Ten, probably have two teams that could win it all. Outside of that, I think it's just different. Sweets, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think the Big Ten is better than everybody else right now. Not only do they have the two last two national champions, they also got the top two teams in football this year with Ohio State and Indiana. And those two are playing better than everybody else. Georgia's hitting their stride right now, so they're going to be a tough out. But really they've showed themselves as the conference to beat over the past few years, and I think it runs in cycles. The SEC had their run. Maybe it comes to an end. Maybe the Big Ten goes on a run. Maybe it just becomes like you said, there's a lot more parity involved, and we get maybe 5 champions where they come from 3 different conferences. That'd be fun to see. But with the money being spread out now, and these kids transferring yearly, it's gonna create a lot of to keep the parity rolling, because there aren't going to be a lot of teams that are going to spend $40 million a year on these kids. So those who will be there every year. DMAC.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's a lot more parity now. But I will say, with the amount of coaching changes in the SEC this year, you look at LSU hiring Lane Kiffin, John Summerall going to Florida, Alex Golish going to Auburn. I think that all 3 of those programs are elevating themselves. Even Kentucky with Will Stein. I think there's a chance for the development to happen a little bit more in the SEC again, even with the portal, which, you look at your teams like Indiana, of course they filled some holes in the portal, so did Ohio State. Man, Ohio State doesn't lose many guys to the portal ever. Um, they do a really good job at keeping guys. And Ryan Day is probably a big part of that, but I would assume a guy like Brian Hartline, who's been there a long time, who's now taken a head coaching job, plays a part in that roster retention to some degree. So it'll be interesting to see, does Ohio State stay on the same trek that they've been on for quite a while? Or will there even be some more parity? Does the SEC and the Big Ten take another step back to some degree and allow the ACC and the Big 12 to catch up a little bit more? The ACC, I mean, did a pretty good job. James Franklin at Virginia Tech, and the amount of money that they're putting into that program, the large assistant pool that they gave him. All those things are going to help elevate the ACC as well. And I keep going back to when I talk conferences, like what happens with Notre Dame eventually. I saw that there's an issue with Notre Dame and USC on the future of their matchup. Does it come a point when Notre Dame finally has to join a conference? And with the tension between them and the ACC, where do they go? If they do end up joining a conference, because I think that's the only way long term. I know they've got their brand, but at some point they're going to have to join a conference, or they're going to be playing teams like Toledo, who's a good team for their level of play. But if they're playing 12 Toledo like teams a year, what makes them any different than James Madison or UNLV or Tulane or Memphis or
Well, let's talk about that for a sec, DMAX. So I pulled up their schedule for next year. Wisconsin is game one at Lambeau Field. Wisconsin was what, 2-10 this year, something like that. And they were the worst team in the Big Ten, and arguably one of the bottom 5 teams in P4, right? Then Rice, who, nothing. Michigan State, not very good. Purdue, not very good. North Carolina, will Belichick be there next year? Who knows? But they weren't very good. Navy, so they don't play a team with a pulse until November. And they play Miami on November 7th. And then they got Boston College, who's awful. Then BYU, who, good team. SMU, solid team. And then Syracuse. So they play 3 legitimate teams next year. I mean, it's, and let's see, 2 of them are at home. And they go to BYU. I just think they've if they want to remain independent, they just got to schedule tougher.
Well, here's something though that has been an addition that was not in play this year, but was signed over the last month that changes this a little bit. So obviously there was the push. The committee sent them a message, you need to join a conference. But then the Big Ten goes out and signs an agreement in the playoff committee. So next year, if they're ranked in the top 12, they're automatically in. So again, that schedule could come into play there. And I don't disagree. I think they should join a conference, and I think that message should have been there. I don't think you should have signed something specifically guaranteeing them a spot if they're ranked in the top 12. But that's what's happened.
Yeah, because what's going to happen is you're going to have a Michigan, a Penn State, an Oregon, an Indiana, or an LSU, a Florida and Auburn and Alabama get left out of the playoff in the next year or two in favor of a Notre Dame team who's ranked a spot behind them. And then what happens? Because if the Big Ten and the SEC get together and say, "Hey, we don't like the way this is going," what's to prevent? College football is already a mess. What's to prevent the SEC and the Big Ten from essentially just breaking off into their own thing in the future? And then you talk about a Notre Dame brand. It's nice for them to get into the playoff, but if you lose the SEC and the Big Ten, that Notre Dame brand's not worth much anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have a playoff.
So let me ask you, what do you think if that came to fruition, if Notre Dame did get in and pushed out a 12th rank or a lower ranked SEC or Big Ten team? I mean, how quickly would the wheels turn? I think it happened instantly, where those conferences started barking at the NCAA. And what are the reasons Notre Dame doesn't join the conference, in your guys' opinion? Do you think it's money or scheduling, the ability to control their own schedule and do things the way they want to? Or because there aren't a lot of reasons not to besides those two.
I think it's one thing. I think it's the television contract with NBC and the money that provides.
So money.
So if you're the Big Ten, you don't want Notre Dame and Notre Dame's television contract. If you're the SEC, the same thing. You want them to join your conference, and they become part of your conference television contract. You don't want that TV contract side what your conferences have. I think so that money aspect is. I don't think it's scheduling, because over the years, you guys might disagree with me, but we could go back 10 years and look at schedules. They, outside of the SEC, they played as competitive a schedule as most other teams. You compare them to an SEC school, maybe not, but they played competitive schedules. Now it's getting harder for them to do that, because with the whole playoff scenario, if you are in the ACC, now granted they've had the agreements, but if you're in the Big Ten, like USC pulling out, if you're in the SEC, if you're in the Big 12, why do you want to play Notre Dame? It's a game that you can lose. Same reason USC pulled out of it. I don't think it's scheduling. I think it's strictly money and that TV contract with NBC. Notre Dame don't want to give it up, and the conferences don't want them to join it and have that contract separately.
7 deadly sins. Greed is one of them.
Yeah. I also think Notre Dame thinks they're a little bit better than everybody else.
No, they do.
They think that
but they're not the only school.
No, they're not. But with them being independent, it just makes it so much louder.
No, you're exactly right. It exacerbates everything. It just says, look, we're alone. We don't need the rest of you guys. We're okay on our own. The rest of you guys need conferences. We don't.
And we finally had them in a position where they were a little bit vulnerable to that, and they signed that agreement. I just don't understand why they did that if they're ranked in the top 12. I think a big part of this too, though, is college basketball does a great job of schedule strength and schedule strength mattering. I don't know why football struggles with that so much. They've got to get the ability like college basketball. I mean, you look every year, your best teams may have 6, 7 losses, and they might end up a 1 seed, and you got someone with 3 losses, and they're a 4 seed because of the strength of schedule. College football's got to adjust to that quickly.
I think it's a little harder for football, though, Kevin, because they don't have the amount of games to squeeze, to squeeze those extra, that extra stuff in, because you're looking at 9 conference games. Now you got 3 opportunities to go outside of conference. Now these teams are saying, well, do we really want to schedule tough teams here? Because if we lose one of these, now we can only lose one in conference or we're done. And if you're in an SEC or a Big Ten right now where you're playing a competitive schedule yearly, it makes it a a lot tougher for an AD or a coach to look at and say, you know what, let's go ahead and have a top 10 matchup in week one. And, like LSU's done in the past few years, you're behind the 8 ball coming out 0-1 and knowing, your backs are against the wall virtually for the rest of the season.
But they do it a lot with conference with metrics, and again, it's a lot smarter than me. But a lot of those metrics tie to how they, devise that schedule strength within it and within college basketball. Because again, the same thing, like the Big 12 has been viewed as one of the best conferences in college basketball for years. The SEC last year got 14 teams in, and those teams play a lot of conference games. So you still don't have a lot of out of conference games, and there's a few teams that'll schedule big games. Auburn does, Arkansas does, Kentucky does, Duke does. But the majority of those teams, and you still have the strength of the schedule in that aspect. I just think that the football's got to catch up to it. And I think there's a way to do it. Again, you look at this year, Texas, with their 3 losses, their strength of schedule should have mattered. Again, that's a whole other argument. And I think the way to solve some of this too is we've talked about it, get rid of the G4, make it your Power 4 conferences, Power 4 only. Go ahead and take it to 16 teams and then put schedule to it. You're going to have to, because the SEC going to 9 games, you're going to have to measure that.
Oh, sweet, you're on mute.
Good catch. How many conference games does the Big Ten have right now?
I think they're at 9.
They have 9. Yeah, everybody else is at 9. The SEC was the last one at 9.
Yeah.
Now the difference though is there are conferences, the SEC being one, the ACC, and I don't think the Big Ten is the one that participates in this, but the Big 12, the SEC, and the ACC are all holding their teams to schedule one Power 4 conference out of conference game, and the Big Ten is not. So that would be 10 Power 4 conference games for everybody else except for the Big Ten.
Which you've still got you've got Texas and Ohio State playing next year still.
Correct.
So you'll have, I think, your top end teams. Like, I haven't looked at Indiana's schedule next year. Let me see if I can pull up their schedule next year.
You're gonna have teams that are gonna be willing to go outside of conference just because a coach believes that playing good competition makes his team better, and the exposure and what that does for your brand. And I'm all for it. One of the things though, to me, being all for that, again, schedule strength has to matter. It just has to. Like, not picking on Notre Dame, because like I said, I think over the years they've been fairly competitive with things. But that schedule next year, if they lose more than one game in that schedule, they should be eliminated.
Yeah, I'm looking at Indiana's schedule. So they've got Ohio State, USC, and then at Michigan in conference play. And then they open the season against North Texas, who's going to be depleted. Then they play the Fighting Howard Bison, and then they play Western Kentucky. And week 3, they actually, okay, their conference schedule date is to be announced, so they haven't announced those games just yet. But
not the order they played, but I think to your reference, their opponents are known. They just haven't put the order in. Right?
Correct. Yeah, I was looking at this, and it showed them playing 3, 4, 5, 6. eight home games in a row, which isn't going to be accurate. So their opponents in conference play are known, locations are known, just dates aren't assigned just yet.
Here's a schedule to look at while you're pulling them up. Look up Penn State's, and let's go over that. And let's say that this is the Penn State with James Franklin.
Okay, that Notre Dame schedule they have four road games, so they have 8 home games next year.
Okay, let me
Penn
share
State.
this Penn State schedule to the screen real quick.
Because their tough conference games that they've had the last couple of years drop off. I don't think they play Ohio State or Oregon next year, do they?
No, they've got a pretty easy overall conference slate. At Maryland, at Michigan, at Northwestern, Minnesota, Purdue, Rutgers, USC, Wisconsin, and then at Washington. In no specific order, but
So being in Ann Arbor will be their toughest game.
Yeah. USC at home.
Yep.
You know, Washington, people talk about them, but they haven't been last 2 years since DeBoer left. They've not been that good. They've lost a lot of games.
No, they had the one good season, but
So you got 2 tough games on there. So they go 10-2, they're in, but they haven't beat anybody.
Penn State,
You know,
8 home games, 4 road games.
and again, likely 2 tough games, 1 tough road game, 1 tough home game. So that's where 10-2 is not guaranteed team from the Big Ten. Well, I'm probably not going to say SEC, even though I do think the Big Ten is getting to that level. SEC level, but again, strength of schedule there has to be a way to measure strength of schedule in this. That has to come into play. It can't be just pure record.
Oh.
If you don't, you're going to have a mess every year.
The powers that be in football don't trust the algorithms like the powers that be in basketball do. But basketball gets a lot more. But it's a little different though, because basketball has 68 teams that ultimately get in, where football has, 12 right now. I mean, because the bowl games are outside of it. If you're in that final 68, if you're in March Madness, you have a chance to win it all. If you're playing in the Pop-Tarts Bowl, you have no chance to win it.
I think something you said there is key. Basketball accepts the algorithm more, and then you follow that up with the 68 teams. So I can accept the algorithm because if I'm a 3 seed or a 6 seed, I'm in. So I know I'm going to get in. But again, at the end of the day, when you look at college basketball year in and year out, most times the teams that win it are a top 2 or 3 seed. Now, you have Final Four teams that can be a 6 seed and those type of things. So you absolutely define why they're more accepting of the algorithm. Football, and that's where I say go to 16. I don't think you need more than 16 teams. Go to 16, but you got to figure the algorithm into this. And strength of schedule has to matter, because if you're 9-3 and you're competing against a team that's 10-2, just because they're Big Ten or SEC, they're very different, in that aspect of things. Again, if Oregon was 10-2 this year, they're not, but just throw that out for example. If Oregon's 10-2 this year and Texas is 9-3, to me, you got to look at that strength of schedule. It's just something they got to be willing to accept the algorithm, and because it matters. And again, basketball does a much better job of getting the top seeds right.
Well, I want to segue to the transfer portal here.
Yeah, let's do it. There's a lot of interesting stuff here.
I know. So I guess we'll start with we can all go over our biggest surprise, and then we'll dive a little more into, the portal itself. Evan, do you want to get us started here?
Yeah, I think to me the biggest surprise is the number of quality quarterbacks in the portal this year. You look the last few years, you would have three or four really good quarterbacks. Mendoza being the one last year, and there were others that everybody wanted. But man, this year the depth in the quarterback position is huge, and we're not done. There's still going to be quarterbacks added to this. Again, a Julian St. Clair from Ohio State, who's third on their depth chart, to me is a very likely candidate into the portal. Deuce Knight, if Auburn takes Byron Brown, is a likely one. And again, that doesn't even count Sorsby, Levitt, um, all the ones that are in the portal. You've got so much depth in the quarterback position, in my opinion, that if you're a school, uh, again, we all watch and support LSU, and they need a quarterback. I could pick four quarterbacks from the portal right now and say I'd be happy with any of them. And there's probably two more that'll probably jump in, and I'd be happy with them. So there's potential of 4 to 6 quarterbacks. And last year that would not have been the case. Of course, they're talking about all the reason that they're entering is because they expect to get more money. Where last year was about a $2 million, I think was 2.5 million was what a quarterback got, and they're expecting it to go to 3 to 4. But man, just the number of quality quarterbacks to me is pretty incredible this year. What's you guys' thought?
I this will sound funny. It doesn't surprise anyone that went in the portal would not surprise me because you're basically begging the kids to do that when you have no salary cap, for lack of a better term. You have no rules against transferring, so it's an open market free agency system. You're telling these kids, you know what? Change your situation every year. Go get more money. Go, do whatever you want to do. The way the system is set up right now, it pushes the kids into it. There's no reason for them not to go into the system. The only reason that they don't go into the system is either A, or it could be both things. A, they love the place that they're at, or B, they get more money that convinces them to stay. But with the system as it stands now, there's nobody who jumps in surprises me because it's set up for that. It's set up for you to jump in it every year because you don't have to worry about eligibility. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. It's an open market. I think it stinks. DMAC.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you, Kevin. Tons of good quarterbacks. Yeah, there's probably 7 or 8 guys on this list right now that if LSU ended up with, I'd be happy with. There's a few guys you probably know where they're gonna end up. But I look all the way down to really like the top 14, 15. Are all guys who I think could have success at a quality Power 4 school next year. So, quarterback market is kind of mind blowing this year. So many options out there. So, to piggyback on that, the offensive line is what shocks me the most right now with how little, I don't want to say talent, but how little proven talent there is. You look at the offensive tackle spot. Yeah, you've got a guy like Xavier Chaplin and Josh Atkins, two really solid guys. Man, you look at, I'm going to use LSU as a reference point here. The fourth best tackle in the portals, an LSU transfer. And then you look at the interior offensive line and your top 6, 3 of those guys are from LSU. And one of the top 6, Noah McKinney, has already committed to Texas Tech. He was a early transfer from Oklahoma State. So, for a school like LSU, since I'm using them as the reference point here, four of essentially the top 10 or 12 offensive linemen in the portal are guys who are leaving LSU. And everybody saw some of the challenges the LSU offensive line faced this year. So that really shows that as of now, I mean, I know we've still got 3 days, so I expect, quite a few O line entrances into the portal right now. I mean, you know, you're probably going to be overpaying by a lot to make sure that you get the guys. And I know the quarterback talk is, hey, 3, 4 million potentially. But I think some of those guys who got in may not get what they're expecting because there's so much talent from the quarterback portal entries so far. You like one guy who really intrigues me at quarterback is Rocco Beck. Um, he's got a $1.4 million valuation. I think that he could end up at a place like Florida next year. Is he gonna get 1.5 to $2 million? Being somewhere in that 15, 16 range of quarterbacks. I think your top end guys are going to command that dollar amount. But after that, once you get through like the top five, I think you may see a little bit of a drop off. Does a guy like Dylan Raiola get what he was making at Nebraska next year? That's maybe some of my questions with the quarterback room. Any other portal thoughts or any positions you guys want to scroll through?
I like your comment about the offensive line, and strictly because I felt like for the last couple of years, and this year would so far be another example of it. The line of scrimmage still be it better be where you recruit well and you develop. If you have a problem developing at the line of scrimmage, you're going to struggle. Um, Again, for LSU players that their PFF grades is in the 50s, that I mean, they're below 300 at their position. If you just strictly look at PFF grades, and so I think that again we go back to those years the SEC dominated. They dominated because they were the strongest league at the line of scrimmage. In football, even though the skill positions and the passing game is more part of how you play, line of scrimmage still matters. So I think that this is a sign that you still better have an ability to recruit guys and develop them out of the portal. You can go grab one or two linemen a year, and your evaluations have got to be good. On these portal guys too, these linemen. You better evaluate who you take very well when there's not the depth there is not as nothing like what the quarterback or the wide receiver position is.
Yeah, the lineman. We've talked about it before. It's all about the evaluations. I think that and development obviously, but if you miss on that evaluation, the development doesn't matter as much because if the kid just isn't that good, you can only get so much. You can only squeeze so much blood out of a turnip. So the evaluations are critical in these portal situations, especially with these. There are so many basically right now everybody's a rent a player. I mean, you because you're having to re-recruit your guys every single year. There's not one guy that somebody can't come in and swoop and overpay to get them to transfer to a different program. So, the evaluations are key, and especially in these portal situations, a school like LSU, DMAC, LSU is going to have to get what 4, 5, 6 linemen anyway out of the portal. I mean, I think 6 is a fair number, and it could even be more than that. But what do what do you spend? There's just so many needs, and so many teams have the same needs. I think you hit it on the head when you said there are going to be a lot of teams overpaying, especially on the line for these kids. So we just hope that the guys that are evaluating the talent, Glass Cock, you're on the clock. Get it right.
He did last year at Ole Miss.
Yes, he
Patrick
did.
Davis, who was probably the best guard in the conference. He picked him up from Arkansas.
Yes, he did. And Trinidad. So hopefully
But
he class.
he redid their line at Ole Miss, and had, whether I don't know if it was the rabbit's foot or if he's just that good. I guess we're going to find out. He's got the results so far.
That's all you can go off of.
Yep.
Yeah, so let's talk LSU football for a minute in regards to the transfer portal. Yeah, Sweets, I know you kind of touched on it from an offensive line perspective. Adding probably 5 or 6 guys. Let's talk offensive side of the ball for LSU. Quarterback, you're looking at probably 2 additions. Running back, I still think you're going to take one if Caden and Harlem stay put. If one of those leave, you could be looking at 2. Offensive line, let's say 6. Wide receiver, you're probably looking at 4. Then you may pick up a portal tight end. So you're looking at 15 guys on the offensive side of the ball from the portal. And there's a lot of programs who are in this situation, just in the SEC, that are, potentially going to take 30 to 35 guys out of the portal. If you're taking 15 on offense, I'll let you break down the defense a little bit, Kevin, with where you think LSU goes.
As far as offense and defense,
give your offensive thoughts too.
So offense, I think, obviously they're going to take more. They've got to revamp a lot of the offense. Receiver, you need 3 to 4 because you're losing Anderson, Thomas, Barian Brown, and we don't really know what the young guy, Billy Us transferring out, Watkins. So you got to have 3 to 4 guys at wide receiver. I really think you take 4 at wide receiver. Obviously, with the offensive line, you might get one of the guys that's in the portal back if you want him. A Kern, maybe an Adams, even though Adams, really didn't, at the end of the day, really didn't have that good a year. But, you might get one of those guys back. But you got to have 3 starters on the offensive line. And then you got to have another 3 or 4 with depth. So probably 6 guys on the offensive line that you're going to have to get, 4 wide receivers. And then you need 2 depth guys at running back. That's provided that you end up with 2 out of the people that they're talking about with Barry, Lacey, and Durham. You got to have at least 2 of those guys. Then you need to add 2 for depth. And then quarterback. If you keep Van Buren, you still need 2 quarterbacks. So, you're looking at 6, 4, 2, that's 12, 14 guys minimum just on the offensive side. Defense, I think your secondary is pretty solid. You might take one if a guy jumps in the portal. But I think Spears and Cooley are solid at safety. And you have Woodland and Pickett at cornerback. I think you're okay there. Not, the depth, you can argue that. But, Jackson, you still probably need a safety from a depth standpoint. Jackson and Turner would be your backup cornerbacks. So that. If Whit Weeks comes back at linebacker, do you have to have a linebacker? And I would say you probably don't. With Weeks, Keys, I think Singleton looked good enough that he can show some development. And then Ross and Jaden Breaker, and then the other Zach Weeks. So I think you have 5 guys that can play inside. Now, again, would a Robert Woodyard be tempting? Sure. But I don't think you have to have there. Now, where LSU has to have help on defense is you got to get guys that can bring pressure. And that was the one thing that after Relaford was hurt, without blitzing, LSU struggled to get pressure on the quarterback. So you could arguably say that Gooden might have been as a defensive tackle, might have been their best, pressure guy. And of course, Perkins could get pressure, but that would be out of different blitzing packages. So you got to go get an end that can bring pressure, and maybe two that can bring pressure. Even though I like Relaford, but you still got to have the depth factor. You need probably two defensive ends that can bring pressure, and Relaford being one, so that you've got three there. And then you're going to need a couple inside guys at tackle. I don't think you can get away from that. So I think you need two tackles, probably two defensive ends that can bring pressure, potentially a safety. So I think five a minimum there. So that'd be 19 to 20 guys, in the portal. And then, you could probably say, okay, there's unknowns. We don't know who we only know who's in the portal now. So that's 19, 20 is probably a minimum. And then when you add others that might portal, if a Don McKinley portals, somebody like that, now you need two or three more. So probably between 20, 25 guys that can make an impact. That's a lot.
And I was just looking at how many kids did we sign out of high school?
16, I believe, wasn't it?
16. So 40 new faces. This is almost like when Orgeron left. Numbers wise, it's not that far off. It's not that bad, but it's I mean that's a lot of numbers, and it's going to be like that every year because again it's an open market, and a lot of these kids are going to be putting their names in there and like every year, there's going to be a lot of kids who end up without a home because they overplayed their hand. So many of these kids are getting bad advice from their agents or handlers or moms
Absolutely.
or whoever. It's it's what do you do? But until the NCAA gets around to fixing it, it's going to be as it is. It's only going to get worse.
Yeah. So I think LSU is going to take a few more defensive players if I had to guess, if everything stayed put. I would go two defensive tackles. I would probably go three edge guys. I'd go one linebacker, even with Witt staying. And then I'd probably go one corner, one safety. So what does that give us? 3, 6, 8. Maybe even a second linebacker, depending on who enters. I wouldn't be surprised if our portal number is closer to 30. I think we're going to see a little bit more attrition from the roster this year of guys who could have a role in the upcoming season. Because I think a big part of it too, with Lane Kiffin and company, and now is also evaluating what we were paying players last year, and having those decisions here. I would assume over the next 72 hours of, hey, we want you, but you're gonna make this number this year, not what you were making last year. And I think you will see some of those guys go. So yeah, I'm interested to see, because you've got six or eight programs in the SEC who probably have to add 25 guys from the portal.
Just quarterback specifically, guys, and DMAC, you go first. Quarterback specifically, LSU needs minimum of 2 out of the portal, minimum of 2, and probably 3. What's your portal budget? Your DMAC Glasscock. What's your quarterback budget, and what's your wish list?
I would say if you're taking guys out of the portal, you take 2 guys. I would think you're probably at 4.5, where there could be a guy who gets 3.5 and a guy who gets $1 million. I would assume Van Buren's going to be around the $1 million mark if he stays. maybe 750. But your quarterback room is probably going to be a $6 million quarterback room. I would assume a lot of programs are going to be like that moving forward. And my wish list, man, this is kind of tough. I really like a Josh Hoover. I really like a Sorsby. I'm not as sold on Sam Levitt as some people are. I don't know how rehab's been going from the injury. If I know DJ Lagway's probably going to command some money, but if he wouldn't be my number one guy, but if you bring him in as the number two to compete and he wins it out, I'm cool with that. I think the talent's there. I don't think he had coaches at Florida the last couple of years.
So Lagway would be your $1 million guy.
Yeah, Lagway would be my backup. And I don't know, Lagway may not be coming anywhere for $1 million, but then when you get down a little lower, like Colton Joseph's another $1 million guy for me. After that, there's some interesting names when you get down low. Like that Jake Merklinger kid from Tennessee. If you land a really good starter, why not bring a guy like him who was highly touted? Maybe at like that $500,000 range, if you can get him. If you bring a guy in for a year and then you have a guy like Van Buren and him compete for the following year, where you can always supplement from the portal again, and then you'll add a high school guy. I don't know if we're going to be able to get 3 transfer quarterbacks in with Van Buren if he stays. I feel like 4's where you want to be, but it also seems like a high ask to bring 3 guys in from the portal. But man, you look at Lane Kiffin's quarterback rooms at Ole Miss, and there were just tons of guys in those rooms. So there's probably a guy somewhere down on this list. Another name that kind of intrigues me is Air Noland from South Carolina.
I was just going to bring him up. To say, here's what I was going to say. Kev, you're saying no, but here's what I was going to say. This is a kid that was, almost a borderline 5-star a couple of years ago. And now, there are a lot of these guys in the portal that were very highly touted coming out of high school 12, 24 months ago, whatever, that now, you could get for pennies on the dollar. And I, they can't all be missed evals. There've got to be a few of those kids in there that just need the right coaching or whatever it is. And again, it's just finding that guy. So who's your guy that you pay 3.5 to then, DMAC? You give Lagway $1 million. Who's your 3.5 guy?
I'll tell you, if it's me, it's not Sam Levitt. I would lean Sorsby or Hoover for my top pick. Those would be my top 2 guys personally. And now if there's an evaluation by LSU team doctors, Levitt's good to go. Maybe he comes into that bubble, but I do think somebody's going to make Levitt the highest paid quarterback in college football. I just don't know if I want it to be LSU. And I think if you go with, a Sorsby or a Hoover, you may be looking at like 2.53, which then frees up. Like I think there's 10 or 12 quarterbacks on this list who could work in a Lane Kiffin system year one. So I would assume that, I can't imagine Trinidad was getting paid a ton of money at Ole Miss this year. So there could even be, under the radar guy who, we give 1.5, 2 million to, who Lane thinks he can make work. The good thing is with Lane Kiffin and Charlie Weis here, it doesn't have to be one of these top 3 guys on the list for me to think that we're gonna have success, you know? Now, if it was, previous administration for football, I would probably look at Sam Levitt and Drew Mestamaker and be like, man, you got to overpay one of these 2 guys because they're rated the best in the portal. But with the offensive minded staff that we have now, it's not the worst thing if you don't get one of the top 5 guys in the portal, in my opinion. I think, every dollar you can save at quarterback and feel comfortable producing, somewhat equivalent results is more money you get to put in the offensive line. Because the offensive line is going to be, the position we add the most in from a body standpoint. And with the lack of high end talent, who's to say, a kid like Chaplin doesn't demand 2-3 million in the portal as the best lineman? Somebody's going to pay that if it comes to a bidding war. And I would rather us get in bidding wars over offensive line than quarterback this cycle.
You just have so many quarterbacks. Yeah, you have so many quarterbacks. So I like the concept of taking a guy that was highly ranked. Again, to me, your evaluation's got to count. So I like the concept of that. Again, someone like a Deuce Knight that hadn't entered, maybe he's your number 1, or a Julian St. Clair. Maybe he's your number 1, and you take a Kiffin who, look, there's nobody more proven at coaching up quarterbacks than Lane Kiffin. Nobody. He got Blake Sims to play well. Jacob Coker won a national championship. Chambliss is in the playoffs. So I'm absolutely 100% behind taking a guy that you eval good. And I do think Kiffin will get – I think he probably will get 3 quarterbacks besides Van Buren, but I think one will be a small, very small college guy that he'll bring in just for depth. But I think he'll bring 2 and try to keep Van Buren. If Van Buren leaves, he'll do 3. I mean, look, he had Jackson Dart, and he convinced Spencer Sanders and Walker Howard to join that team. And you already had Austin Simmons on the team. So I have confidence that he'll add quality quarterbacks there. So I think the evaluation piece matters. The only reason I was no on Aaron Nolan is because I saw him. I'm telling you, he can barely throw the ball 50 yards in the air. That is not an exaggeration. He can't hit a 25-yard out on the sideline on a line. He was 4th string at South Carolina for a reason. He was way over-evaluated because his team won a state championship and he threw for a lot of yards. But he threw for a lot of yards, throwing a lot of screen passes. So that would be my point there, the reason I was no on Aaron Nolan. But there are guys out there that are developed that can be developed. So I like Sorsby. You mentioned Levitt, but again, you got a lot of schools that want Sorsby. So I'm not sure that he's not going to end up being your most highest paid guy in this group, because the schools that are after him have some money to go out and throw it. So I don't know. That part's going to be interesting. I just like the numbers though there. Again, your point about the offensive line, and again, evaluation matters there, but you're going to have, I think if LSU overpays, they got to overpay on the offensive line versus some of the other positions. I trust their evaluations on quarterback and their ability to develop a quarterback.
Another name that I like is Braden Atkinson. That's one of your boys, Sweets, from Mercer.
I'm gonna give you guys a name. Kevin remembers him. This is gonna be my Trinidad Chambliss for this year. This kid named Tyler Hughes that played at Marietta a few years ago. He's a quarterback. He was at William and Mary. Had 20 touchdowns on the year, 3 interceptions. Rushed for I think around 1,000 yards, something like that. 6 foot, 200 pounds, dual threat kid, mobile, good arm, tough. I would be more than good with him being a Chambliss type of signee. Go look at his go out. There's the homework for anybody who's watching this. Look up Tyler Hughes and watch 10 minutes of his tape. There's your name, Tyler Hughes, William and Mary. Now, you guys know I always put up for the Marietta kids. I always do, but this kid's legitimately good.
Was Calzada a Marietta kid?
No.
Buford.
Okay.
No. Harrison Bailey was a Marietta kid.
Harrison Bailey, that's right.
Yeah. Now he hasn't went totally TJ Finley on us yet, but he has been to 4 schools in 6 years.
You know who hit the portal? AJ Swan. He's leaving after.
I saw that. I saw that. Yeah. There was another kid who, Dylan Lonergan.
Yeah.
And was he still playing baseball too? Because he was a big time baseball player too. I think when he had signed with Alabama out of Brookwood.
He was, and he didn't play baseball at Bama. He didn't play a lot. I think he did go out for the team that first year. I almost wonder if he's going to go back to baseball. I really thought he would have a good year for Boston College, and O'Brien was the one that recruited him to Bama, and so O'Brien believed in him, and you heard good things. But after the year he had this year, I would almost think he might be better off to go back and really go after baseball.
Speaking of baseball, did you guys see Michael Braswell signed with the Kansas City Royals free agent deal?
Good for him.
He's
as a pitcher.
Yeah, he's
trying to make it as a relief
pitch.
Yeah.
He's been this pitching lab that's been working with him. He's thrown the ball 96 miles an hour.
Yeah, I read that. That's
Well, and he when he first went to South Carolina, they recruited him as a pitcher. He played shortstop a lot his senior year and developed. But even his freshman year, he started out as their closer at South Carolina. But just playing shortstop, the burden of that kind of took that away. So he's got arm talent.
Yeah, I'm excited to see him get a chance. He was one of my favorites under the radar at LSU.
Yeah, he's a Marietta area kid. He went to Campbell.
Right. You got to root for him because he was the ultimate team guy.
Yeah.
He transitioned from shortstop to third base, and really the key to him playing was his defense and the different things he did. And in that championship series, he made it that first night, when we won that game 2-1, he made a couple of big plays at third that, kept that game, a win for us. So you got to root for the guy that's willing to do whatever it takes to just get on the field.
Yeah.
Well, any last minute portal thoughts before we wrap up?
I can't wait till Friday. We're going to get some more surprise names, and I can't wait to get it started. Friday's just going to be the beginning, and then as you get into the weekend, how many of these guys already know where they're going? I think probably a lot of them do. So I think I can't wait till Friday and this weekend to see how things start, flowing out.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how many. I mean, there are going to be a lot. I'm just curious of what there'll probably going to be a few surprises, even at quarterback, where we come back and say, damn, I would have never thought he was going to leave. But again, all these kids are being told, hey, look, these teams are, everyone's got a bigger NIL budget this year. Put your name out there. If you don't like it, come back. That's what their agents or their handlers or whatever tell them. And that's going to happen in some cases. Some cases, they're not going to have a place to go back to.
Yeah.
I think you're going to have 20, 30 guys that we hadn't even heard about that basically enter the portal and sign because they already have got an agreement through their agent. Good players.
Yeah, wouldn't surprise me at all.
Well, we may have to hop on Friday night if y'all are around, and we'll start predicting where these guys are gonna land on Friday. We'll break down like I don't know, a couple position groups like wide receiver, running back, quarterback, and throw out some guesses as to where these guys are gonna land.
One thing we predicted well was the coaching carousel, the hot seat, and then also we were very good at coordinators that ended up being in head coaching roles. We named a lot of them that ended up in head coaching roles. So maybe we can have some of that same fortune with the portal. I think Friday's a good idea. Plus, the quick recap of the Wednesday and Thursday game, and then get deep into the portal. Of course, we can do our previews for the playoffs tomorrow, but yeah, I think Friday would be good.
Yeah, and then after that, basketball season's going to be firing up too. I mean, we're getting into conference play.
I know, man, getting closer and closer to baseball season too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's a wrap for tonight's episode. Thanks for joining in with us, and we'll talk to you soon.